Ladies and gentlemen, Brad Wenzel.
Brad Wenzel is an ingenious stand-up comedian who currently calls Los Angeles, California home. Originally from just outside of Detroit in Monroe, Michigan, Wenzel has been doing stand-up in his unique one-liner style for about 8 years now, and he's earned praise and support from the likes of Patton Oswalt and Amy Schumer along the way. Third Man Records recently released his hilarious debut album, Sweet Nothings, and because I love it so much, I called up Brad, and we had to talk about his life in Michigan, his comedy heroes and style, the podcast he and a friend make celebrating the underrated work of Bob Seger, his future plans, and much more. With in-kind support from Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, and Granddad's Donuts in Hamilton, and of course, listeners like you who make flexible monthly pledges at patreon.com/creativecontrol. Download episodes, subscribe to this show, tell your friends to subscribe to the show. You don't tell them, you don't insist, just to offer, suggest to them that they subscribe to this podcast. If it wasn't for you, this would not be the 420th episode of Creative Control featuring Brad Wenzel and your host, me, Vish Khanna.
Thank you for that very standard reaction that I definitely get at every show. Thank you for that. A week ago, I performed for 8 people. That was very nice of you. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, here we go. All right. Easing in, getting used to me. Okay. But I always feel weird just launching into my jokes. Let's just count me in from 5. Let's just count it down from 5 together, and then I'll go. All right. Here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the other day. The other day, a bird shit all over my car. There's no actual shit. He just made a lot of negative comments about it. They flew away. That's the whole joke. That's all of it. It's going to be a lot of stuff like that. All right, here we go.
Hi, Brad. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. It's nice to speak with you. Where in the world are you today?
I'm in my apartment in Los Angeles right now.
Oh, cool. I've heard of that place. How's Los Angeles doing these days?
It's good. It's very hot out, but I haven't been outside yet today, and I kind of have the blinds drawn, so it's very dark in here. And I drank a bunch of coffee, so I don't know what's going on out there. But I'm gonna go out there soon. Probably after this, I'll re-enter the world.
Okay, well, that sounds healthy. I mean, the latter. The rest of it didn't sound quite as healthy, but that sounds good. Now, you are, if I know anything about you, and I know very little, which is why I called you, frankly. I just wanted to learn more about you, because I really enjoy your new stand-up record, Sweet Nothings, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for writing about it.
Yes, I did. I wrote a little review of it, a very short, brief celebratory review for Exclaim magazine here in Canada, and yes, and now I'm following up with a call. That's what I do every time I review something. I just call the person up to be like, was it okay?
Well, yeah, you did great. It was very flattering. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. My wife and I were enjoying the record just the other day, and she's a big fan now of yours as well. My point here is that I believe you're a Detroit person. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's where I started stand-up. I didn't grow up in Detroit, because that if I were to claim that, I would be a poser for sure. But I grew up about a half hour or so south of Detroit, but comedy-wise, that's the scene that I came up in.
Okay, and what was that like for you? Is Detroit known as a comedy hotbed per se?
I don't think it's known as that, but there is a good scene there. I think it's a very underrated place to start. I think it gets overlooked in that sense. But it is a good scene, and a few people have come out of there. But yeah, it's a good good little place to start. You know I always say you know the movie 8 Mile.
Yeah, I've seen that film.
Yeah, it's nothing like that at all. But it's yeah, you just kind of drive around. There's a lot of small cities close together in southeast Michigan, like Detroit and Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Toledo, Ohio, and like Lansing, Michigan, are all like kind of within like an hour. Lansing's a little further, but they're all close enough that you can kind of keep just driving between those cities and getting a lot of stage time if you have a car and you're kind of ambitious about it, which is kind of how you have to do it out there.
Yeah, and so how long have you been away from Michigan? How long have you been out of that state?
Just over 2 years now. I moved to Los Angeles.
Okay, and do you have it, like it hasn't quite been, what has it been, 5-6 years since we heard that Detroit sort of had, was, done, essentially? Like,
the bankruptcy, that was 2012, I think. And but it's weird because I think that's right when things started to sort of turn around a bit. So I had this big sort of public, sad-looking headline about it, but it was kind of from then on that things started to, like they're still working on it, obviously, but the vibe was that things started to gradually get better after that point.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not, people are more, there's like a stigma about Detroit that I think is kind of overblown. Like, it still has its problems and stuff, but it's not, people act like it's a third world country or something.
Yeah, I mean, did you, growing up in Michigan near Detroit, did you have was it relatively safe, good upbringing and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, where I grew up, like I said, where I grew up wasn't Detroit at all. Like, I wouldn't classify it that way.
Yeah.
It was, where I grew up was almost more teetering on rural. Like, I grew up in a smallish town, Monroe, which is pretty small, and then I grew up kind of on the outskirts of that town, so kind of out in the boonies. And yeah, it was there wasn't a lot of anything. It was a lot of I grew up across the street from like a golf course, a public golf course, and a sod farm, which is just grass. They just grow grass for like people to come by for their lawns. So, and then that was like corn at a point. So there wasn't like a lot of anything. That's why I think becoming a comedian and stuff is always it's such a contrast, just because like I grew up in a way where once I got older, I would go somewhere with tall buildings, and I was like, wow, I can't believe how tall these buildings are. So it's very it's very different than LA.
Did you have the experience growing up in well, you're ostensibly saying that you grew up in a suburb of Detroit, I think, right?
Yeah, though people there wouldn't even, it's too far to even count as a suburb of Detroit. It's like a half hour, which by that point, it like doesn't count anymore.
Okay, that's fair. But did you find that you had to, when you came of age and could go to Detroit, is that where you got your kind of cultural fill of stuff? Like, is that what you would do?
Yeah, any town I went to, like I went to college in Toledo. Which is Monroe, where I grew up, is halfway between Detroit and Toledo. So I remember Toledo's a fairly small city, but when I was like 17, it felt like like going to a big city. And then I spent a lot of years in. My girlfriend went to the University of Michigan, so I spent a few years living in Ann Arbor, and that was definitely more. A lot more going on there than those other places and stuff. And yeah, I would say that's sort of nature of comedy in general. You travel a lot and you get to expose yourself to different places and things like that.
So, like, you're growing up and you're living your life, and so how do you come into contact with comedy? First of all, do you remember what it was? Was it TV? Was it a magazine? Did you see someone perform? What was it?
It was TV. It was Comedy Central. They used to play, when I was a kid, they would play like stand-up specials, especially the half hour the Comedy Central presents. they would play those at like 3:30 in the afternoon, like a lot. So you just as a kid could just kind of stumble upon stand up, and and that's how I found like Mitch Hedberg and Stephen Wright and a lot of the one-linery guys that I like loved when I was a kid. And yeah, that's what I would say where I saw it at the first time.
So you described Stephen Wright and Mitch Hedberg as one-linery guys. I think you're quoting my review of your record at this point. Just, you mentioned one-linery things. Like you are. Do you believe in this label for yourself? Are you a one-liner comic?
I would say so. Yeah, I do short jokes. I have a few longer ones, so I mix up a little bit as kind of the longer I'm on stage, the more I think I'll mix it up. But yeah, overall, I would say I would be in that genre.
Okay. So what has drawn you? You mentioned those two comedians and the way they made that work for themselves in their own unique and idiosyncratic way. But what is it about one-liner comedy that appeals to you? I mean, you mentioned you're mixing it up, but I'm just curious, like, did you try different longer form stories and jokes and then just figure out that maybe the one-liner stuff was more satisfying?
No, I was doing short jokes like right out of the gate. That's how I've always done it. And I found that that's what I'm good at, and that's what works. Like if I could tell like a 10-minute story, I would do that. But I'm not particularly good at that stuff. Maybe I will be down the road. Maybe it could change. But I kind of always wrote short jokes. They just they weren't as good, and then you just over time you get better at writing jokes and performing them. So yeah, that was kind of, I think you every comic just kind of does what they're capable of. Like I'm not sitting on a bunch of amazing stories necessarily, but I think a lot of great storytellers can't write concise jokes, and I think you look at there's strengths and advantages to either way. So I think you just kind of lean into what you can pull off.
Yeah, I was wondering as you were speaking, I was just pondering, asking you whether or not you describe it almost as a genre, which I think you're being kind of facetious, I guess, but like it is a mode of joke telling, I suppose, for sure. And I was going to ask you if you thought it might be underrated on some level, but then I was thinking of the rise of people like Anthony Jeselnik or Dimitri Martin.
Yeah.
There's a certain school of one-liner comedian that are just doing really well with it. And I'm just curious, though, I guess I will revisit this thought I had. Do you think it's not taken as seriously maybe as other more confessional or storytelling comedy?
I think there's maybe a minor stigma, or it's not the hot thing right now. I do think of it as a genre. Like you said, there's Jeselnik, Dimitri, Hedberg, Stephen Wright, Emo Phillips, Galifianakis. His stand-up is like that.
That's true, yeah.
There's just so many. Usually people only know one person is the thing. Like the average person knows like one of those guys, and they're like, oh, that's the only person who does that. But there's a pretty big spectrum.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say I think there's a vibe that there's definitely emphasis on more personal and confessional type of stand-up, and I think that's great. I think that's amazing, but I think sometimes people get the impression that if you are talking about something more observational, or say you do a joke about let's say coasters or something, the impression is, well, anyone could tell that joke. But I don't think that's true. I think that people forget it's actually really hard to write a really great joke about coasters and tell it well. And I think that's what made Mitch Hedberg so great, was his jokes most people couldn't pull off. It was the way he was saying it that made it so funny. And if someone went up and just tried to repeat what he said, it wouldn't work. And I think that's usually the case. Jeselnik's another guy is like, great delivery, great timing. I don't think just anyone could do his jokes, but I think sometimes that's the way it's looked at. Is like, oh well, anyone could do that, but I don't necessarily think that's the case.
No, I mean anyone who's seen Justin Lake and watched him engage in crowd work as well. I mean it's an astonishing thing to see him do stuff like that. I have to say. And I mean, I don't want to get too academic or clinical about it, but do you see, what do you think of the relationship between observational comedy and one-liners? Are one-liners sort of a subgenre of longer form observational comedy? Like I think of people like Seinfeld, who, obviously is a giant of observational comedy, but there was always this sense that I think that people resented the fact that they didn't really get to know him as a person.
Yeah.
And like with a one-liner, like obviously I have a sense of your perspective on the world, but it's also, you're making kind of observational jokes, and it's not personal on some level. Anyway, I mean, maybe you already spoke to this, but I just find that kind of fascinating. Like, is there a self-defense mechanism there too? Do you not want people to know that much about you as a person?
There might be on some level. I just don't think I'm that interesting, to be honest. I'm just I don't know if it's that. Yeah, I just don't know if it's that interesting. I think I would rather just tell a funny joke, I guess, than talk about me personally.
But we're in an age where everyone is interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of boring people. I think I'm fairly boring.
Yeah.
Maybe, and this could all change. We could have this conversation in 5 years, and I could have a radically different actor opinion on it, I guess. But yeah, for right now, I think it also came from starting stand-up so young. I was 17 when I started, so no one wants to hear about your opinions or your life when you're 17, but you can kind of get away with talking about things everyone knows. Like everyone knows birds. So if you tell a really good joke about birds, they're going to be like, yeah, that's pretty funny. And so maybe that's part of it. But yeah, that's just sort of how I figured out how to do it, I guess. I don't know if that answers the question.
No. I mean, it just sounds like this is our way of knowing you. I mean, this is an extension of you and your belief in the fact that you are boring and that your jokes are more interesting than you. Your work is more interesting than you.
I would say so. And my friend Mike Czar is a comedian, and he's a close friend of mine, and we do a lot of shows together on the road and stuff. And he's under the impression that people learn about me from the jokes when I'm on stage, like more than you would think. So maybe there's something to that, but that's just his opinion. He's said to me where I'm like, I've said like maybe it's I've expressed like concern where I'm like maybe it's bad that I don't talk about myself more, and he's like, I think people learn more about you than you realize when you're on stage. Maybe just in a sensibility way, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, you have it sounds like to me you have a certain amount of modesty, and I'm calling you today from Guelph, Ontario, which is about 4.5 hours from Michigan, let's say. And,
oh, cool.
Well, I'm just curious if Canada, I don't mean to make this all about us, but did being so close to Canada have any impact on you? Did you absorb any Canadian culture, Canadian mannerisms, anything like that?
I would say, yeah, I would go over to Windsor and do shows. So that was usually my brush with Canada was going across the Detroit River to go do shows there. And then Tim Hortons is my favorite coffee, and it's super prominent in Michigan, and I can't get it in Los Angeles, and it's been a real tough time for me. I love Tim Hortons, and when I'm back in the Midwest, I seek it out very aggressively.
Okay, so it's primarily our coffee chain that
yes.
has the head. Not our.
And people ask if I'm Canadian from time to time, and I'll say, well, Michigan, so about as close as you can get, I would say, as far as the states go.
Right. So you feel a little Canadian.
A little Canadian, yeah. I think Michigan's the most Canadian part of America if you had to pick.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that actually. Or maybe upstate New York. Would you? Maybe no. Upstate New York, it definitely has an American feeling, I would say.
Yeah.
Whereas Michigan does feel like there seem to be more deer on the side of the road.
Yeah, there's a lot of deer. Yeah, I guess there's too many. That's the way it was always framed to me, is that there's like just too many deer now, and
Yeah.
it's like kind of a problem. But
Yeah. No, it is. I think there's too many deer and too many geese. There's just Canadian animals are taking over, I think.
I think it's because they're so majestic. People don't want to eat them as much, but they're very pretty to look at.
Yeah, no, I hear you there. So, I mean, you're on this record label with this record. I mean, before we get to Third Man Records, which is a company that was founded by your fellow Michigan native there, Jack White. Before we get to that, I'm just curious about this set that appears on Sweet Nothings. How long did it take you? Did you say you're 17? How old are you now?
25.
Okay, so you've been at this 8 years.
Yeah.
And does any? I just did some. Do you see that? I did math. That was amazing.
That was very quick. Yeah.
So, is any of this material stuff that you is part of your origin story? Are you well past that? Like, I'm just curious if any of your earliest material is reflected here.
There's a handful of jokes on there that are really old, and a lot of stuff that was fairly new too. It was a pretty big mix. I would say there's a joke I did about Jesus's dad being really nitpicky about him raising from the dead. I wrote that joke in study hall when I was in high school.
Wow.
So that's a really old one. And then there's that joke about Boy Scout patches, how they would work harder if their shirts were full of holes. That's also like probably that might be the oldest joke on the album.
Oh wow. Okay, so
That
this
was an old one. Yeah.
Is that purposeful? Did you want this to kind of reflect the 8 years you've been working on comedy?
I think those jokes were just like you stumble when you start out, you're not very good, but you do stumble on a few good jokes, and those were just what that was. Like I was like, oh, these jokes are still good, and they changed, the wording of them changed over the years and stuff and got better. But I think it was just like, no, these are good enough jokes to put on the album. But for the most part, it was stuff from the last few years. I would say there's plenty of. Sometimes I'll have people at shows back home come up and be like, "Yo, you didn't do the joke about whatever," and I'll be like, "Oh, I haven't done that in like 7 years. You just haven't you haven't seen me, you know."
Is that a weird thing? Like, musicians are used to doing the same song for maybe their whole career. But is that a weird thing that people want to hear a certain joke? They know the joke too. Like, why do they want to hear is that weird for you?
Kind of. Because usually if I'm not doing it, it's because I didn't like it and I wanted to get rid of it. So it's now I have to replace everything on this album over time. So now if I'm not doing it, it's just because I'm trying to replace it with new material. But there was a lot of stuff early on that I was like, oh, this might work, or this is okay, but I don't think it's that good. So there was probably like 3 or 4 years ago, there was a bit of a purge of old jokes, and I started to that's when I knew I wanted to record an album. Was I got to a point where I was like, okay, I have an album's worth of jokes where I like all of it. I don't dislike any jokes on here. But also there was a lot of stuff where I was like, the idea of telling some of these jokes a year from now makes me cringe. So I either need to put it on something, or they're just gonna fade away, and probably never see the light of day. So I kind of got to that point where I was like, all right, I have enough. I think they're all good. I can put this out and move on. You know.
Do you remember the first joke that you wrote that worked? I mean, I assume you started out with some things and worked on them and refined them, but do you remember, I mean, is it even represented here? Do you remember the first joke that you wrote that you thought, I'm onto something here?
I would have to, somewhere, not here, but somewhere back at my parents' house, somewhere there is this set list from my first set, and if I looked at that, I could probably tell you what it was that connected the first time. I remember the first like thing I said when I went on stage for the first time. But it wasn't. It was a riff. It wasn't like a pre-written thing. I remember that getting a laugh, and then when the jokes. Oh, you know what it probably was? It was a joke about. It was a joke about if I was in a band. I'm not in a band, but if I was, I think I'd name it. Have you seen this child? Because then people would be more likely to take your flyers.
That's good. That's very strong.
And then it was. I think the act out was "Have you seen this child?" Were pretty good, and then and that was, I think that was probably in that first set and probably the first joke, and then like years later, like I realized Hedberg had a joke about flyers that was really funny, and I was like, you know what, I'm people are already gonna compare us. I'm already too similar to that guy, so I think I nixed that joke later on. But I think that was one of the first ones that was really consistent.
I see. Okay, and you mentioned that you came up with a kind of a music joke. Was music significant for you?
I mean, I'm a music fan, I guess. I took guitar lessons when I was 12, but I couldn't figure it out. I didn't quite have that skill. But yeah, I always enjoyed music. I didn't participate in it a ton necessarily, but I was just a fan. I grew up listening to a lot of like classic rock and stuff like that, and yeah, I still listen to music a lot.
Now you have am I correct? You actually co-host a podcast about Bob Seger?
Oh yeah, Pod Seger. Yeah, me and my buddy comedian Trevor Smith. We're both from Michigan. And just a huge Bob Seger fan. So we started a podcast about him, and he's underrated. So we like to talk up Bob.
You just talk him up. Yeah,
basically. Well, sometimes we change the format a lot. Sometimes we'll talk about a specific album. But what we've been doing a lot now is bringing in a guest, usually another comic who also likes Bob Seger, and then it's sort of an open-ended conversation about like why we love Bob Seger, and it's pretty fun. It's fun to make it, and I find Bob Seger endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, I was at a Bob Dylan show at the State Theater in Detroit once, I went. I think
I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, it was weird. I went to 2 nights of, I think he was doing 3 nights, and I went to the second and third one, I think, is what it was. And on the second night, apparently earlier in the day, the governor of Michigan declared it to be Bob Seger Day. So Dylan ended his set with a Bob Seger song.
Yeah. There was an interesting thing. There's only like one book on Bob Seger. They've made like no books except for this photography book. And there's a story in there about how when Bob wrote that song, he played Get Out of Denver.
Yeah.
And I guess when he wrote it initially, he wasn't like thrilled about it because I think they wanted to make it a single and he didn't feel like it should be. So he kind of was annoyed about that. And then what happened was he went into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that day. And so that's why it got declared Bob Seger Day, which has happened like a bunch of times over the years. And then, Bob Dylan played that song, so it was kind of a funny story to be like, he was annoyed about the quality of this song or something like that, and then Bob Dylan thought it was a good enough song to play.
Do you think Dylan knew that when he did the song?
No, I don't. I think he just thought the song was good.
Oh.
Kind of a behind-the-scenes kind of story. Like, in retrospect, this is kind of funny that he was annoyed with this song at one point, but Bob Dylan, who's, someone Seger was a fan of, and, is obviously one of the greatest songwriters of all time, is like, this is a pretty fun song. This is a good song.
And then the third night that I went to that third show or whatever it was, my wife was with me, and I said, you know what? I would not be surprised if either Eminem or Jack White joins Bob Dylan at the end of the show, at some point during the show. And she's like, okay. And then who should come out at that show but Jack White, and they did a White Stripes song.
That's amazing. That would be really fun to watch.
It was ridiculous. They did Ball and Biscuit. So this is, I think, a little bit of a segue, unless you want to plug your podcast some more. It sounds interesting. I'm going to check. I haven't listened to it yet, but it sounds cool.
It's a fun, if you're a Bob Seger fan, it's fun. And then I recommend the guest episodes. It's just like a fun hang, just in general. Even if you don't know Bob Seger that well, it's just a fun listen. So it's Pod Seger, and it's on all the usual stuff.
Do you think there's misconceptions about Bob Seger based on some of his biggest hits? Like, do you think that people have a narrow view of the guy?
Yes, absolutely. I think he's sort of put in this very narrow. He is a blue collar guy, but people almost put him in this very narrow light when he has like a pretty crazy body of work, more than just. People usually know old time rock and roll and like a rock, and that's about it. But he has a crazy body of work, and he's a really smart artistic guy. And I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. I think he's just as good as Bruce Springsteen is, but he doesn't get the same sort of critical acclaim and stuff. And just in general, he's for how big he was, he doesn't get put on the same pedestal, and that's what Trevor and I talk about. Is he's kind of underrated. People sleep on Seger, so we like to remind people that Seger's the man.
Is he or his camp? Is anyone associated with him aware of your show?
I have no idea. I don't think so. But maybe. Who knows?
Okay, we should make that happen. Let's get, because they did that Talking U2 to Me show. Scott Aukerman Adam Scott and Scott Aukerman have these U2 and REM shows, and at the end of the initial run of their U2 show, who goes on the show but U2?
That would be. Trevor and I had joked about that. If we can get Bob on, that'll be the finale.
Yeah.
Well, because you can't top that. But that would be pretty sweet.
Does he still live in Michigan?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we have to make this happen. I'll do whatever I can to make this happen for you. I want to ask you about this Third Man Records. Oh no! Before that, it was on my mind. Can you recommend some Bob Seger records for me to listen to, just so I can dig in? That's what I was thinking. I just forgot to say it.
I think my favorite one overall, if you're just going to throw one on, would be Live Bullet. That's the one that broke him nationally. It's a live album recorded in Detroit, and it's just amazing. And it's kind of so he had success as a very young guy with Ramblin' Gamblin' Man, and then he put out, over the next 8 years, he put out like 8 more albums, but they weren't they were received well locally, but not nationally. And then he kept becoming more and more popular in Detroit. And then he recorded this live album, which is basically a sum of all the best stuff from those eight previous albums.
Okay.
And on top of that, a lot of those songs just sounded better live. Like, he just performed the shit out of it. And then I don't know if I can swear on here.
Yeah, you can. Anything goes in Canada. It's fine.
Okay, cool. And so that is what broke him nationally. And so that I think overall is like the most fun one to just throw on. I would say Live Bullet. And,
okay.
And then his next 3 albums were all huge successes.
Okay, Live Bullet. I will start there because I have to confess I have not dug deep into Bob Seger, but now this Pod Seger podcast makes me think there's a whole world I need to discover.
It's important we talked.
I think so for multiple reasons at this point. Now, I want to, speaking of music, you are now affiliated with Third Man Records, which is primarily a music label. They do all sorts of things. How did you become associated with this label?
So I did. They have a place set up in Detroit called the Cass Corridor, and they have a vinyl pressing factory in there, and a store, and also like a performance space. And a comic from Michigan who I started out with, Zach Martinez, started putting together stand-up shows at that place. And so I got booked a little over a year ago to do a show there. And so I did the show and it went really well. And the two dudes, Ro and Dave, who like run that operation, were there, and they really liked it and had a really good time at the show. And that was just really good timing because I guess they were saying Jack White had just been in there like a few days before and was kind of they were talking about stand up, and he was kind of saying like what happened to kind of one liner comics, like that's not as popular now, but I like that. And then like a few days later I showed up and did my show, and they were like, oh, this is kind of what he was just talking about. So they were like, we should do something. And I was like, well, I'm booked at a club to record an album, but I don't have a label yet. And so they were like, oh, well, we're a label. And so I gave them the phone audio from the show I did in their place. And I think they passed that along to Jack, and he liked it. And then we kind of got the okay. And then things just kind of went from there.
Nice. So that is a true. It's not rags to riches. I don't mean to disparage your life before you encountered Jack White, but maybe it is.
I'm still rags. Things are pretty rags now. I'm still.
You opened your album by saying that the week prior you'd played to 8 people. Was that true?
Yeah. I did a whole run of shows to get ready to completely varying sizes of crowds. Like some shows were packed, and one show was like 8 people, and that's just kind of how it goes.
It's remarkable, but I mean, this is a testament to your talent, if I might say. Like they heard, well, and you say it's timing and luck, and that's part of it too. But you should feel good about yourself, I would say, Brad.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to try to do that. I'm terrible with compliments because I'm like, I need to stop arguing with compliments. But I appreciate that.
Yeah. So what's sort of next for you? I mean, this record, as we're speaking, is just out. It's not even been a week, I guess, since it's been out. Is it being received well? Besides me and my review, are you getting nice feedback about it?
Yeah, it seems to be the Comedy Bureau, which is the big LA comedy website, did a nice write-up on it also. And people have been saying nice things and to me personally, so it seems like people liked it. I mean, if they didn't like it, I don't know why they would say anything to me. So maybe people are quietly seething about it. But it seems like people like it, which is nice.
And do you feel a sense like there's some momentum here? Like, is there chatter about opportunities that you're like, whoa, what's going on?
I hope so. I hope it leads to that. There's definitely with Patton Oswalt tweeted about it, and Amy Schumer tweeted about it, which is really nice of them, which I think helped kind of get the word out about it. And so it feels like there's more. I guess momentum would be a good word for it. But I don't know where it will go right now. I'm not sure.
Right. Now you've opened for Patton, is that right?
Yeah. I've opened for him a handful of times, and he's always very kind and nice to let me do that. And so it was nice of him to tweet about it.
Right. So you have that association. Do you have any association with Amy Schumer per se? Like, do you know what prompted her to do that?
So Amy Schumer is a very interesting thing because we've never met in person. But after I performed on Conan last year, and after I did my set, she sent me an email because she was watching the show because the second guest was an actress and who's her friend. And so she was watching Conan and she saw my set and she sent me a really nice email. And I was like, oh, this isn't real. And then and then it ended up being real. And I was like, oh, cool. So she was just like, it was just a very nice, if there's anything I can do, like your funny email. And so then when the album was coming out, I was like, oh, this would probably be a long shot, but I can just let her know it exists,
Yeah.
And then she was like, in 2 minutes, she like tweeted, posted about it. And so it was, it was very, very nice of her.
That's amazing. See, this is everything. I feel like everything's going great.
Yeah, I'm just really broke. That's all. That's all I got to do. Like I have a very weird life because I very my comedy resume is very good, but like I drive Lyft and I'm trying to make rent and stuff, and so creatively things are great. But it's a weird. I'm in a weird place in my life.
That's exactly how I feel, and I have some years on you. There's something going on within the creative sphere, I think, where a lot of us are. And by the way, I'm certainly not putting myself in your league, of course, but we make things to make them, and then something happens to them sometimes, but it doesn't it translates into cachet and not cash, if I might make a stupid pun.
Yeah.
Like you've got the cultural cachet, but you're not making enough. That doesn't necessarily translate into dough, I guess. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now, because it feels I guess dishonest in a way when people are kind of like, well, you got it figured out, and I'm like, kind of, I've been very fortunate, and I am happy with how things are going, but then you're also like very aware of the lack of stability also. So you're like, I'm doing well, but I also need all the help I can get, kind of feeling.
Right. Well, if it's again, this is just my perspective up here, but it does feel like you're on the right track or whatever. Like things seem to be. I don't want to be one of these people that is saying you're doing fine, but I'm happy for you because this record is fantastic, and I'm glad I'm glad I encountered it recently, and I'm glad we had a chance to speak as well. Where can people go to learn more about you, Brad, and potentially, I know you're shy, but follow you online and all that stuff? Where do you send people?
My website's bradcomedy.com. That'll have like tour dates, stuff like that. And then it's at Brad Wenzel on all the social media stuff. So if you just type in my name, I should be there. And check out the album.
Are you the only Brad doing comedy? How did you get bradcomedy.com?
It's funny, everyone says that, but I always look at it as a failure because I wanted bradwenzel.com and I couldn't get it. It was taken. So I got bradcomedy.com as a backup, and but people are always very impressed by that.
What does the other Brad Wenzel do? I don't want to promote something that...
It doesn't go to anything. Some guy just was like, I just want to have this and not use it, and he beat me to the punch, so nothing I can do.
One email to Amy Schumer and you'll get that domain back. She's very powerful. I'm sure it's just that someone's just parking it so they can, sell it to someone like you.
Yeah. Well, at this point, I'm like, I'll just be bradcomedy.com.
Bradcomedy.com is just fine. Would it be permissible to play one or more bits from this record right now? And if so, do you mind selecting one or more of these bits for us to play?
Yeah, I would say the third track is called Something Inspirational. I think that's got some good jokes on it.
Okay, is there anything you want to tell us about the formulation of this joke or anything that... I know it's called Something Inspirational. Did anything inspire it? Oh, man, I did it. Sorry. Is there anything you want to say about it beyond that?
I just think it's the best track on there in the sense it's just a run of jokes I really like. That's all I would say. But yeah, it's a good. That's my go-to when I look at all the tracks. You go, oh, that's a pretty good one.
Okay, that's fair. This is Something Inspirational from the record Sweet Nothings by Brad Wenzel. Brad, this was really, really fun for me and a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, and keep your head up. Best of luck to you. Everything's going to be great.
Thanks for talking to me. I really appreciate it. Continue making this podcast and writing reviews.
Did you know that you can just buy a redwood tree? You can just do that. You can just go online and order a giant sequoia. I didn't know that. I planted one in my parents' yard, and that's a slow burn, but that's a pretty good prank. It's going to be a real big tree. A lot of people think the middle finger is the most offensive hand gesture, and those people have never given someone's baby a thumbs down. That's way worse. There's something inspirational I like to keep in mind. I find this very inspiring. Early on in his career, Dr. Seuss was rejected by 27 publishers. It's like, no matter what happens, don't ever let anyone tell you that you have to like Dr. Seuss. Of course it rhymes. He's making up the words. There's something I noticed. I noticed that a woman wearing overalls is always 1,000 times more open-minded than a man wearing overalls. You know, like she's a bisexual art student. He hunts squirrels from his porch. Like, the only thing they agree on socially is there's no such thing as too many bumper stickers.
Special thanks to the very funny rising star, Brad Wenzel, for appearing on this, the 420th episode of Creative Control, which is part of the Entertainment One podcast network and is available on all iOS and Android platforms and also on things like YouTube, Spotify, and Audio Boom. If you can't find an episode that you're looking for some reason on any of those platforms, it's possible. Or if you want to learn more about me and sign up for my regularly scheduled newsletter, please visit my website, vishkhanna.com. You can like Creative Control on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at VishCreative or at Vishkhanna. You can listen to a radio show version of Creative Control on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Standard Time around the world at CFRU.ca or on an actual radio at 93.3 FM if you're in or near Guelph. Also, please visit patreon.com/Creative Control to make a flexible monthly donation to keep this podcast going. It could be in any amount you choose. It could be $2 million a month or $1 million a month. It doesn't have to be two. It could be $1 million a month. Go to patreon.com/Creative Control and please pledge at least $1 million a month. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thanks again to Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee, and Granddad's Donuts, of course. I have to thank them too. This all of the in-kind support and free coffee and donuts and pizza and books that these places provide me, it's great. Thank you for that. Thanks to my dear friend Jim Guthrie. We listen to comedy records and comedians all the time, and we laugh about them, and he loans me his song, The Rest Is Yet to Come, the instrumental version of that song for the end credits of the show each week. So thank you, Jim. JimGuthrie.org for more info about him and his amazing music. And you. Thank you for listening to this show. Thank you for listening to this episode up to this point. I mean, you've gone almost the whole way. And that means a lot. I appreciate you listening to this show and if possible, giving it a nice review or rating on your podcast platform of choice. And certainly downloading episodes helps a lot in this modern age. So if you download the episode, that's great. And again, subscribe to the show. That would be the best way to keep up with me and this program, is to actually subscribe to the podcast. That's all I have to say for now. I will talk to you very soon. And I hope you're well. And that's it. Bye for now.